It's not just about spreadsheets and dollars and cents and robots and AI, right? There's a very human element to working at a big company like Twitter, where I used to work at, for example. I think that the nonprofit is a little weird because everybody has a very different reason and a very different motivation of why they're involved with it. And, my feeling, although maybe controversial, is that we're all really selfish people, right? In general, we all do things selfishly for our own good. And the good might be a decent reason, meaning like I want to help kids with martial arts, but at the end of the day, part of that is because it makes me feel good about myself, right? It makes me feel good, like justifying my place in the world, and hopefully, like when I die someday, I'm like, okay, like I did something good for somebody. I helped the kids. Even the unselfish stuff is kind of selfish, and I think if you're practical about it and you look at it from that angle, there's some reality there, and it actually helps you to make decisions.
Ben Kovacs is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Eduardo Fraga, and he's the founder of Guardian Gym, a nonprofit dedicated to making Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu affordable to young people who otherwise wouldn't have the financial security to access training. Ben previously worked at Twitter, and he is a serial entrepreneur who has launched companies including Lifted View and the EA Mafia. You can learn more about Ben and Guardian at guardiangym.com and at Guardian Gym on social. Joining me as a guest host is Blake Kazemeier. Blake has been a guest on previous episodes of Choose the Hard Way, where we've talked about our experiences at the Unbound 100 gravel race, and he's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt who's a friend of Guardian. Blake is a creative director, and his short story videos are blowing up on TikTok. You can find him at Blake of Today there and on all platforms. This is a conversation about the intersection of good intentions and reality and what it actually takes to build a lasting and effective nonprofit. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I think you will too. If you're new to this show, thanks for listening, and please like, subscribe, hit 5 stars, and leave a review wherever you listen. If you haven't taken a moment to do that, please do so. I really appreciate it, and it helps the show to surface higher in search so that more people can find the motivating stories that my guests share here on Choose the Hard Way. Choose the Hard Way is a podcast where my guests share stories about how hard things build stronger humans who have more fun. I'm Andrew Votz, and I've spent more than 25 years telling and shaping the stories of the world's top performers, brands, and businesses. I've held executive and senior leadership roles at the social network for athletes Strava and the human performance company TRX. My byline as a journalist has appeared in dozens of outlets and hundreds of articles in publications including Rolling Stone, Outside Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and more. Today, I advise and consult with businesses and nonprofits on high-impact storytelling strategies, and I coach leaders to become high-performance communicators. If you'd like to work with me, reach out on LinkedIn or send an email to choosethehardway@gmail.com. If you're interested in sponsoring Choose the Hard Way, reach out to @HardwayPod on social. As always, you can find those links in the show notes.
Joel and I started Guardian in 2015 when we were working together at Twitter, and neither of us had any experience running a nonprofit or running a gym, right? And the original idea for Guardian was to build this gym in Oakland, offer it to both kids and adults. The adults could pay a flexible membership, likely more affordable than other gyms in the area. The kids would train for free. And we wanted the adults as well as the kids because we felt like the adults would become natural mentors to the kids on the mat. With that being said, I always knew in the back of my mind that this wasn't really a scalable model, and we weren't going to be able to put gyms all over the country and all over the world. And of course, as someone who was working in tech and doing this other stuff, and the rest of my life, I always kind of felt this weird thing there where I knew that wasn't necessarily like the right model to help the most amount of kids. But with any new business venture, you kind of have to start small and do kind of the unscalable things to learn and build it up. So, I guess what I'm saying is I almost knew that it wasn't the right model from the beginning, but we had to take our lumps. We had to learn. We had to start to kind of build Guardian in an organic, natural way versus trying to kind of scale it from day one. I think the thing that I probably would have done different, like more tactically, is we tried to do way too many things. We were doing boxing. We were doing kickboxing. We had food programs for the kids. We had jiu-jitsu, obviously, for the kids. And jiu-jitsu was always my passion. And I was kind of compromising with everybody because, one of the other staff members wanted to do a weightlifting program for the kids. And, one of the staff wanted to have the boxing program. And what I should have probably done is just kept it more focused and said, hey, we're just going to do this one thing, or we're just going to do these two things, not these six things. And providing kids after school jiu-jitsu for free is just hard enough in itself, but trying to run food programs and trying to do all these other things, have an on-staff psychologist to help the kids and things like that. We were doing a lot basically. So would do less, and I would have more quickly scaled to the version that we have today of Guardian, which is essentially partnering with other gyms around the world who already have mat space, they already have insurance, they already have a passionate instructor, they already have a kids program. And now we're going in and saying, listen, you already have all these things, but you have extra mat space. How can we put a Guardian program into what you're already doing where you can actually raise more money to support your gym, cover your overhead while getting more kids into the program to train? So I just would have moved, I think, a little bit quicker instead of trying to keep like all the different stakeholders happy in the organization.
And Ben, I've heard you talk at length on a number of other podcasts about the actual origin of the business, nonprofit rather, why you got started, and then what that trajectory was like. With what you just described, I'm curious, was there, given your background and the partner that you were working with, what was your vision for the original minimum viable product, or what was like the first atomic unit that you tested before you started to bolt on all of these other things? And then it sounds like it kind of started to sprawl and then you had to edit back down. But what was the first thing you started with?
The first thing was just opening up. We rented a space in Oakland. We opened up a regular martial arts gym. We started with the boxing and the jiu-jitsu, and we had really no plan, right? We were putting flyers at the farmers market. We were posting things on social media. We had signs out in front of the building, and that was a big mistake. I made, almost like any business. They say you should have your distribution strategy first, or you should have your distribution channels and then start your business. We didn't really have that. So it was more this long slog for the first 6 to 9 months just to kind of get going. And you can't have a successful gym if you don't have people in there to train with other people. So getting those first 20 students was really hard and took a long time. Of course, going back, I would do that very differently now to try to speed that process up. And I think that's why the guys who have the big names in martial arts, the guys who are winning these big tournaments and stuff, it's a lot easier for them to start a gym, right? Because they already have a following online and they already have this sort of credential at the door. But because I wasn't a world-class jiu-jitsu athlete, I was like, hey, I'm the guy who's going to do the marketing, kind of create the nonprofit. I'm going to hire people to actually teach the classes who are better than me, and I'll focus on this other stuff. Because my theory was always that a lot of the gyms, you had somebody who was great at martial arts, but they were terrible at running the business, terrible at the marketing. I kind of try to flip that around and say, I won't be the teacher, but I'll be the guy who handles kind of the business aspect and will pay the teachers, which is really the inverse to most gyms.
So that 0 to 1 or cold start problem sounds like it was one of the hardest aspects of getting to where you wanted to go. If you were to do it differently today, how might you approach that cold start or just getting things up and running?
Well, I think in the case of, if you wanted to compare apples to how we did it, I would definitely have preceded, I think, a lot more demand leading up to once we found our building space, that time from kind of the build out and the things that we had to do to get ready. And when we were actually opening up the classes, it would have been going around and trying to get pre-reservations with the kids, getting adults to sign up, doing whatever promos it took to get it in there. So that way, even if you weren't making a lot of revenue at the beginning, you would at least have warm bodies in the door and training partners to scale from. And we probably could have sped up 6 months or so if we had done that better. Like I said a few minutes ago, though, our model is different now in the sense that we're going into these gyms now that already have existing programs, already have adult members, already have something established. So we don't really have that problem as much anymore because now kids are walking into a program that already has other kids training. Teachers that already have a curriculum, they already have all these things going. So that cold start problem is not there anymore. And now as soon as we identify a kid who can be helped by the program, we can fold them into something that's already working, which is just obviously infinitely better than where we were when we started Guardian in 2015.
And what resulted in you shifting to the new model, and how did you start testing it or implementing it?
Well, it was something that I always wanted to do, right? Pretty quickly after we actually started, and I recognized the problems with running a gym. I actually met my wife and moved over to the other side of the bay And so for me, I was kind of far away from the gym logistically as well, which was another challenge for me. And we had, really great staff who were doing different things. Our jiu-jitsu teacher was really great. I had another guy that was helping me to run things. We had volunteers who were starting to show up and do different things like photography and videography and help with the kids' classes. We really had a great kind of little thing going in a small space. Where we started to go off the rails is right before COVID. So let's say COVID started in March of 2020. Um, Only about 3 or 4 months before that, we moved from our small 1,500 square foot space to an 8,000 square foot sort of mega gym that Blake's familiar with in Oakland. And the idea was we could just have way more kids in there. We could be running multiple classes at one time. We could have, weightlifting while a jiu-jitsu class was going on, while there was boxing going on in the ring. It was a really kind of epic space. Then COVID happened and everything just sort of fell apart, right? Because we had 15 different stakeholders in the organization, right? We had the different people teaching the different classes, the other administrators, and everybody had a different idea of how a gym should run during COVID, right? And obviously the Bay Area was one of the most locked down, I would say, kind of areas, right? It wasn't one of those areas that was just everybody was kind of like Texas where they were just freewheeling during COVID. Everybody was very sensitive for the most part, yet we had certain groups within the gym who wanted to just have like free for all training still. And so everyone was mad at me, right? Like the people that didn't want to have anybody in the gym were mad at me. The people who wanted to train all the time that had to wear masks, they were pissed at me. And, I'm just a guy living an hour away, working at a nonprofit for free that I started to give kids free jujitsu. And now all of a sudden I'm like public enemy number one from every angle, right? And I felt it was a really telling experience of kind of who the people were that were on the team and who was there for the right reasons, because they were more flexible, I felt like, but we just had certain people who sort of developed these cliques and they wanted to like just fight everything tooth and nail. And finally I just stepped back and thought, if everybody wants to be upset about this and no one's happy with it and everybody wants to kind of run their own personal training now and do their own thing with their own friends, and they've kind of forgotten the mission of why we're here, which is to help as many kids as possible in Oakland, an area that definitely needs help with the kids. Why am I doing this, right? Like I'm spending all these money paying these instructors to complain all day. Not that all the instructors were paying, but a few kind of loud ones and staff members who just really couldn't, I felt like, move on with the reality that we were facing. I thought, well, now's the perfect time that, we should change the model, right? We shouldn't, it just kind of brought everything to light of all the pain of the model that we had with all that overhead of the space, the pain of trying to keep all these instructors happy. And let's use our money most efficiently to get back to focusing on what we do, which is help the most amount of kids possible. And we had this data point by that time, which was our school in Baltimore, a separate Guardian in Baltimore. And their cost per student was, I don't know, a fifth to a tenth of our cost per student in Oakland because of the overhead there. And I don't know about you, but it's like, I don't view like necessarily, I don't want to spend 5 times as much money for a kid in Oakland than I do for a kid in Baltimore. To me, a kid is a kid. And if we can use our money as an organization more efficiently, we should be moving that money as any business would. Elon Musk talks about it all the time. At a core, he's really a capital allocator, right? He raises money, he puts money into ventures, and if he can do that more efficiently than the next guy, that's why Tesla or that's why SpaceX wins. It's not like he's sitting there designing every rocket and doing all the physics for the company. He's an allocator of capital. And I view Guardian as an allocator of capital. We bring money in, and my main goal is to help the most amount of kids possible. And I felt like during COVID, it became clear that we weren't doing that with the space we had in Oakland, and it was time to shift course for the future.
And Ben, when you were in the middle of that experience and things started to get really complex, it sounds like it was emotionally complex. The business started to get overly complex. You were having operational challenges. How did you go from being in the middle of that problem to stepping back, doing an analysis, and then taking action? And how did that feel for you to see this thing you put so much love and energy into end up in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, to be honest, a pretty brutal experience because I think that a lot of the people that were working at the gym were not only just coworkers, but a lot of us were very close friends. We did a lot of stuff off the mats. I saw a lot of people kind of grow up from 6, 7 years of kind of being with the organization, and meet their now wives, and make new relationships and make new friends. But it was tough because I feel like people kind of had to pick sides in some way, and they had to have different scapegoats and people to blame for that. So it was certainly a tough thing. But I would say that the one thing that's helped me is I never looked at the organization as this thing to give back to me and this thing to fulfill my life. And I do think there were some folks who were so all in on Guardian that it became this thing, like Guardian was their purpose in life. And that was like really, really awesome in some ways, because I feel like it drove a lot of energy and a lot of passion and a lot of positivity through the organization. But then when things started to go the other way, it became a huge problem. And all of a sudden, the things that were fine the first few years, let's say, of working with the organization, once they started to go the other way and there started to be those challenges, all of a sudden it was like, I'm not getting back from the organization what I'm putting in. And it's like, well, you can't expect, this time in, time out thing, dollar in, dollar out thing, whatever way you want to quantify it. You're essentially doing this pretty selfless thing, helping kids, and you're not getting a lot back, right? The city's not complimenting you. A few parents, might give you a pat on the back now and then. A few adult students might give you a thumbs up or make a donation and recognize the work that you're doing. But it's like a 50-1 what you're putting in versus what you're getting out. And I feel like I'm very lucky because I have a really awesome wife. I have a young child who's now 5, who was, call it 2 or 3 at the time, 1, 2, 3. I don't know what he was when all this was starting to happen, but it wasn't something I was looking for the organization to be my everything. So it allowed me to say, look, I've got a great life. I've got these other things to worry about. I have to make a more prudent decision for the organization of like what's best, and not this sort of emotional decision of, hey, like we got to keep 15 different friend groups happy here. So I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, but I think it was just like not being so, you can't be so attached to the thing and be expecting it to be your everything if you're going to make the smart sort of business, if you will, decisions about the organization.
What was new or different about operating in a nonprofit environment as a leader versus the manner in which you would operate in a business capacity or within the jobs that you had in tech? Were they analogous, or did you have to find new ways of working, new ways of managing people and teams?
Well, I think the thing that I was just talking about was the biggest thing, which is that like when you're at a company, everybody, there's definitely egos to massage. There's definitely problems that arise. There's definitely soft skills of dealing with things. People are human. It's not just about spreadsheets and dollars and cents and robots and AI, right? There's a very human element to working at a big company like Twitter, where I used to work at, for example. Um, I think that the nonprofit is a little weird because it's not, everybody has a very different reason and a very different motivation of why they're involved with it. And, my feeling, although maybe controversial, is that we're all really selfish people, right? In general, we all do things selfishly for our own good. And the good might be a decent reason, meaning like, I want to help kids with martial arts. But at the end of the day, part of that is because it makes me feel good about myself, right? It makes me feel good, like justifying my place in the world. And hopefully, like when I die someday, I'm like, okay, like I did something good for somebody, I helped the kids. So it is, even the unselfish stuff is kind of selfish. And I think if you're practical about it and you look at it that from that angle, there's some reality there, and it actually helps you to make decisions. But yeah, I think I struggle with that part of the nonprofit, of sort of the really, really soft skills of constantly trying to find, um, what's the word? Constantly try to find the confirmation between all the different parties that everybody's on the same page, and deal with the city governments, or these local foundations, or the people that really have all these political interests and emotional interest attached to it. Like I think that it's very hard to navigate. And I think that's why you see a lot of people that are running these organizations have a lot more soft skills than I do, as far as like, their patience and how they massage all these local interests, if you will, to keep their nonprofit afloat and going. Where I'm more just like, hey, like it's black and white. We're helping people. Like we need to raise money. We got to do this. We got to do this. Like you just kind of go down the line in a more practical fashion versus the soft skills of running a nonprofit.
And what is the experience that you want to bring the kids who are in the program? What do you hope to achieve with what you're doing?
I think the number one thing I think about is opportunity, right? And we can't make a kid train hard once they're on the mat. Um, we can't make them continue to come back to class. The thing that I think we can provide as we open more and more Guardian locations around the world is we can provide kids an opportunity to get started in martial arts and find a passion. And that's really, I think, the most important thing, because I look at kids when they get in trouble when they're 18 or 19, let's say 20, 17, whatever their age is. And my first question is always like, did that kid have an opportunity? And you look at some of their stories of like, they didn't have any parents, or, their mom was selling drugs when they were 12 and they were forced to, go work or do something. I'm like, that poor kid did not have an opportunity to like have a fair crack at it, right? Like I was fortunate. I got to play sports growing up. I had two loving parents. I got to go, they helped me, push me to go to college. And then kind of whatever I do with my life after that, it was like, I had the opportunity. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to start focusing on is giving kids an opportunity. And in this case, specifically with jiu-jitsu, it's like, it shouldn't be an elitist sport where it costs too much money for a kid to get on the mats and train. If they try it and they don't want to come back, totally fine. But let's at least open the doors for kids, whether it's through Guardian and what we're doing, or whether it's through other after-school programs and nonprofits and other ways that we can help them. So at least when that kid makes a poor decision, or that young adult makes a poor decision someday, it wasn't because they didn't have an opportunity.
And when people come into contact with Guardian, the vibe, of course, is different. And, whether you're going to a jiu-jitsu school, you're going to a gym, for me, I'm a cyclist going out on a group ride, going to a race. Every community has a slightly different vibe. What is the vibe that you want people to experience in the community that you're building?
Well, keep in mind that we now have 7 schools, 7 academies around the world. So, the vibe, if you will, is going to be slightly different depending on, where you go, which I think is a good thing. The vibe that, in general, that I think we want to have is we want to have a place that's welcoming, a place that, again, gives that opportunity, and a place that allows people to connect and make friendships and find those opportunities off the mat as well. Right. And I think that's a big key to what jiu-jitsu is for a lot of people like Blake and I. Is it's not just a place where you go and get beat up and choke other people and things like that. It's meeting a positive friend group. Right. And, I can probably tell a lot about you, and you can tell a lot about other people by just the 5-10 people that they hang around with the most. Right. There's a very high likelihood that you're going to turn into something very similar to those people. And by having positive mentors on the mat when you step in, and having people that are eating healthy, who are coming to the gym and exercising, having a forced break from screen time, I think all those type of things lead to a happier, healthier, more positive life. So that's sort of like that vibe and that opportunity, if you will, that we want to create when you come into a Guardian, or really what I think people want at anybody who owns or operates jiu-jitsu gyms wants to create, right? That's what keeps people coming back to it. And, we're really not too dissimilar from like non-athletic endeavors, right? We want kids to get healthier grades. We want them to be better listeners. We want them to be more patient. We want them to have better friends. Like everyone's kind of trying to do the same thing. We're just choosing this avenue of jiu-jitsu and of martial arts to give people a path to get there, because I don't think kids want to go to school for 8 hours a day and then go talk to a fucking guidance counselor for 2 hours after school about some, more books they should read. Like they need to get their energy out. They need to, clear their mind. It's almost like, yoga is really to clear your mind before meditation, and why it was originally designed, right? Or why people started doing it. I think of, martial arts and specifically jiu-jitsu as the same thing.
And what is your jiu-jitsu practice like today, personally?
Man, not good. No.
Tell me about your practice.
I have a weird jiu-jitsu journey, I guess you would say, that I've always trained at really great schools. I started at the Yamasaki Academy in DC when I lived there, moved out to the Bay, started training at Ralph Gracie in Berkeley. Then I started working at Twitter in San Francisco. So I started training in the city with Kurt Osiander at Ralph Gracie San Francisco. And so I've like trained at these sort of like really well-known big schools with tons of high-level people, but I never would go to competitions. And part of the reason for that was because one of my best friends who won the white belt world championships about 6 months after I started training. I got him into it. He hurt his back from overtraining and over competing, and he's never been able to train since. And I know it's been a huge bummer in his life, because it was really his favorite thing in the world. And I kind of made this conscious decision then that, I really wanted to try. My focus was not going to be about winning a tournament this year. It was going to be about how could I be on the mat when I'm 75 years old. And so I've sort of structured my jiu-jitsu that way. And I've caught a lot of flack from, some of my friends and of course teachers of like, you need to be competing and you need to be doing this. But my thought was I'm kind of competing every day that I come and every day that we spar. So I don't need to, spend the resources, the time, the money traveling to these tournaments, but also kind of be taking that additional risk of injury if my ultimate goal is to be on the mat when I'm 75. And now I train mostly at Cayo Terra because of proximity to where I am in Menlo Park. And I go down to what they call their competition class, which is like a 1 p.m. class that has collective 25 or so world champion medals on the mat every day. And it's like pretty brutal. Like I'm lucky if I win, half of one round in one training session. So that's kind of my training now. And then I go around to other gyms and, see friends like, somebody like Blake will say, oh, I'm training down at this school, open mat on Sunday, and I'll pop in there and train because it's, I think, not only fun for me to kind of stay connected with friends in the community, but it's also good for Guardian to kind of keep, meeting new people, going to new gyms, things like that. So really hard competition style training, but also sort of like this flexible, go around and train other places a lot too.
Yeah, Ben's a fucking savage. Yeah, just for context, so you know.
Yeah, I don't know about that. In the kids' classes, maybe.
Yeah, Ben, part of I have some knowledge of jiu-jitsu. I'm not a practitioner, although I do want to point out that Blake, I think I was at Blake's first ever jiu-jitsu class, probably, unless Blake does a lot of secret training, so you may have gone to something before that. But was I at your first ever jiu-jitsu class, Blake?
Yeah, you were, dude.
Yeah. And I know enough to know, Ben, that some of the schools you're describing are gladiator schools. Like, so you did a lot of training at very intense environments where there are people going extremely hard. So to hear you say you want to be able to do jiu-jitsu until you're 75, some of the schools that you named aren't the ones that I would think of if I wanted to do that. So what specifically about how you would approach rolling or your practice of jiu-jitsu when you're going into an environment, how do you approach that with that intention of like, I want to be doing this for a long time, I don't want to get injured, when you have people going really hard? At least that would be my perception of what you described.
Man, I'm probably going to get me in trouble with this one. I feel like I've been saying too much already on this podcast about.
And if I'm wrong too, because like I'm out of my depth here. If you guys are actual very high level practitioners, I'm an observer.
I'm kind of just laughing inside because like this is stuff I think about a lot, but I'm definitely not the norm, to be clear, right? Like most people, I'll start off by saying what most people do and then what I do. Most people go to a gym and they have this sort of hero worship, right? Their teacher is their new god of life. And a lot of teachers, unfortunately, in jiu-jitsu think that because they're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, that they're a black belt in life. And it's almost like the worse they are in life, the like more they want to tell you how great they are, right? You do find a lot of great teachers. Like I think, Blake's old teacher Hamilo is probably a good example, just like really awesome at jiu-jitsu, very confident, very chill, like didn't need to preach to his students about, how great he was in life and how everyone needed to listen to him. He would tell his students like, go train at other schools when you move, all these things, just like a really perfect example, I think, of what a jiu-jitsu teacher kind of could and should be, right? There's lots of those guys out there, but there's a lot of like bad guys too. They're almost running like these like mini cults, and my thing is like, I just have never had this like hero worship, right? If I meet a celebrity or meet a jiu-jitsu teacher, it's like, until you prove that you're like this amazing human that I need to dedicate my life to, like I can respect you and, totally, play within the sphere. But just because like you say something doesn't mean I have to run out and do it. And I've always had this attitude of like, I don't trust everything just because you're the jiu-jitsu teacher or just because you're on the school or whatever. Like I still want to be my own person, right? And I have this all the time where people say like, oh, I can't go train at this other gym, my teacher would be mad. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, go find it. If your teacher talks to you like that, then fuck him and fuck that school, right? Like, go find another gym and train there if you don't agree with that. Like, why are you listening? Why are you a 30-year-old grown man listening to some guy tell you where you can go this weekend and where you can train? To me, that is just like fucking ludicrous, right? And I know that's how jiu-jitsu was back in the day when like one teacher came to America and then there was 5 and there was 6 black belts. Like, it was very like secretive and whatever, but we're not like that anymore, right? Everybody knows. And if you go to a place like San Diego, everybody's training at different schools and going to different open mats. Like, that time has passed when, like, you need to do this sort of like cult hero worship style jiu-jitsu, right? Now, if you are in that situation, that's of your own doing, in my opinion. Like, you've signed up for that type of thing. So to get to your question about how to stay safe, I think the first thing is you have to just be like super brutally honest with yourself about who you want to train with, right? So 250-pound crazy guy and his first day comes up to you and says, hey, like, do you want to roll? For me, the answer is like, hey, dude, like, I'll roll with you later, but like, I need to go warm up first. I'm 41 years old. Like, I'm going to go roll with Blake. I trust Blake. We're the right size for each other, whatever the situation is. But a lot of people won't do that. They're just like, oh, like, he asked me to roll. Oh, he's a higher belt. Oh, I don't want to be embarrassed. Oh, my teacher's making fun of me. So like, I think you just have to just really think about yourself in that situation, as bad as that sounds, and make sure that you're prioritizing like your health and safety, before you're kind of falling into the trap of the tough guy syndrome, right? When you get hurt on the mat, I've seen this happen 100 times, right? The tough guy that didn't want to say no to the other tough guy or whatever, they get hurt and somebody like throws them an ice pack and they're like, do you need any help? And then all of a sudden you don't see that guy for 6 months. Nobody pays their bills. Nobody goes to their house and cooks them food. Nobody helps them with their kid. Like, it's like kind of sucks, right? It's not a good long-term decision. So sorry, Blake, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that perspective is not unlike not to tie this back to what we were talking about earlier, but, kind of swallowing your pride and saying, hey, I don't need to have the gym. Like, I don't need to have the physical guardian location in order for this organization to do what it needs to do, is a very similar attitude, right? So like, the fact that you didn't necessarily want to be the receiver of that same sort of like hero worship that you see at a gym, even though, you're not the head instructor at Guardian, you're still a force in the community and you're still a force at that gym. And so like, I think that same perspective about like how, we're not going to just say that this one gym, this one physical space, this one instructor is the end all be all of our sport, and we're completely loyal to it. Like, you're loyal to yourself and to your practice of jiu-jitsu. And so that allows you actually to become better. Same way with like Guardian, like, it allows that mission to serve more people. It's an interesting point of view. And it is one that is like, it is unique, or at least it's modern in terms of the way like jiu-jitsu is today. Yeah.
No, I think it's an interesting point that you drew to, like, I mean, I definitely will admit that, I like certain things about being able to walk in the gym and, people say hi to you and, your kid gets special treatment because you're like the guy who founded it. So he gets a place to train and everybody's nice to him. There's definitely like perks, right, to like having that physical space. But I've always like, I watch a lot of mafia history. I'm really infatuated with the mafia for some reason. I watch like all the YouTube documentaries on like the New York mob and stuff. And I've always like admired the guys who never got caught, and they were like the behind the scenes quiet guys that like nobody really knew about until later. And they made all the money and they had all the power and they were very careful. And then you have like the John Gotti who came along and he was just kind of like out there puffing his chest out, wanted the fame and the fortune, and it didn't really work out so well for him. And I've always thought like, I want to be like the old school guys, the guy who kind of is behind the scenes, who's pulling the strings, who's making it happen, who can show up, but doesn't have to kind of be the face and have the pressure of that. And, Dave Clahan has been a good example of me, the guy who owns Half Gracie Berkeley. A lot of people, the new students, because Dave can't train anymore because he's older and has health issues. A lot of the new students don't even know who Dave is, which is sad. But, Dave bought that building. He put the gym there. He helped Eduardo, who's the awesome teacher there from Brazil, come to America and set all that up. not necessarily just because he wanted to make money, but really he just had like a real passion for jiu-jitsu and the community. And he was a successful guy with his other endeavors. And he's kind of like that scary, soft-spoken guy, right? Who, what's it called? Carry a big stick, like talk softly, but carry a big stick, or whatever that saying is, the Teddy Roosevelt saying. That's what I think about Dave. And I always kind of wanted to pattern myself after that of like, hey, like have a big impact, but you don't need to like have your picture all over the wall and be, the guy in every video type thing.
A question for both of you guys, because I know Blake, at least whenever he travels, he's going to a new gym. And Ben, I don't know, do you do the same thing when you're traveling? Do you just hit up new gyms and train with new people?
For sure.
So when you go into a context like that, I'm imagining that at least part of the time you might end up with that gyms or schools where there is the hero worship thing going on and it's not quite what you're looking for. What do you do when you're in a situation like that, and what can you learn in those situations? Or have you all, when you're traveling, have you ended up training in a gym like that? I know, Blake, you have I might get the move wrong. Was it the flying triangle that happened to you?
Yeah.
Will you tell that story, please?
Oh yeah, for sure. But just first of all, like, and this is not just because Ben's here, a strategy that I actually take is I always travel with Guardian merch. So I always travel with a Guardian tank or a Guardian t-shirt. And if I walk into a gym and someone recognizes that, then I know it's a signal to them and it's a signal to me that like, oh, okay, that's what this guy's about. Like this guy is about this shit. And I get recognized in Guardian gear all the time. Same thing with like on social media, on TikTok. Like it is a signal to people that like, that's what I am about in this sport. And I think does it tell people that you're os, or what does it tell them? That I'm super os. No, just that like, I believe that jiu-jitsu should be made accessible for everyone. That I think that supporting children in this sport, particularly kids who couldn't afford this, initially. And also like structurally, sorry, like in the broader, like in the historical context of jiu-jitsu has always been for the elite class. Like we always talk about, oh, jiu-jitsu is for everyone. Jiu-jitsu is for everyone. If you read like Hickson's biography, it's for the aristocracy. It's for the people who could afford to have like privates or pay for instructors to fly over from Japan to teach them this martial art. So the idea that it could and should be free for children is in the context of jiu-jitsu, maybe not now, but like in the history of it, is a very revolutionary idea. Anyway, so I think wearing Guardian merch when I walk into a gym gives people the signal that like, hey, this guy is not going to be whatever as absolved in that like absorbed in that hero worship. But anyways, the flying triangle story. I was like on a short trip to LA and it was like a Sunday and there's not usually a Sunday open mat anywhere. And I found one gym that was open that happened to be like a mile away from my mom's house. Didn't do a ton of research. I went down there. There's only one other dude in the gym. He's another blue belt, which I'm like, okay, I was a blue belt at the time. Like, cool. And like, I'm doing like my like super cool guy pre-competition warm up, like, looking fucking like I'm, you know what I mean? Sending a message. What
does that look like? Like, is that more aggressive shrimping or like what goes down?
Well, like, if you're like shadow wrestling, right? Like if you're like sprawling and taking shots and like doing stuff on your feet, it does look a little bit more aggressive than like, say you're just like, doing the, I'm about to go run stretch. You know what I mean? Like sure. So anyways, and so, slap hands with this kid. And like within the first 5 seconds of our roll, I don't even know this guy's name, just jumps flying triangle. And I was like, holy shit. Like that's very aggressive. Like that's definitely sending a message. And he was like,
can you explain what that is, Blake? Because 99% of people listening will have no idea what you
flying
said,
triangle is. So like imagine
means.
Like the most dramatic pole dancing move you've ever seen. But the pole is like my neck. And this person jumped up in the air and wrapped their legs around my neck and my arm to try and strangle me with, between my shoulder and my carotid artery. And then it was hanging there. So like we go from, hey, I don't even know your name to I'm flying through the air with my legs wrapped around your face. Which is like not uncommon. I mean, you know, that's a position that we would get into, but it's so like, it's so aggressive. Anyways, and so then luckily I was significantly bigger than this guy and I have a decent triangle escape. So like the triangle escape that a blue belt has is very aggressive. It's like, okay, cool. I'm going to drop kind of all my body weight on you. I'm going to smash you until you let go with your legs. And then like I moved over and I tapped him. Right. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Like we got that out of the way. Slap hands, he does it again. Exact same setup, exact same move. And I responded with the exact same way. And it's happened like 3 times. It's like, okay, this is your fucking thing, I guess. He didn't tap me with any of those. And then like the 6th time, he actually did another flying move, a flying Kimura, where he like, I started on my butt and he jumped over me and he tapped me there. And then like our whole training session lasted about 15 minutes before he was like completely exhausted and done. But yeah. And then his instructor didn't do shit. Like his instructor was sitting there the whole time, like looking at us being like, yeah, all right, that's cool. And I went back home and I told my professor about it and Homolo, who Ben mentioned, and like a great jujitsu lesson. So Homolo, the first question he asked me is, you know, did you tap? Which I said, you know, I was like, well, eventually. But the second question he asked was like, hey, what did his professor do? And I was like, he just sat there and he's just like, like he could never imagine running an academy, watching this happen and not intervening in some way as your student is like, you know, whatever, making a terrible name for your place. But anyways, yeah, that's the flying triangle story.
Right. So Ben, is there something about Blake that makes people want to jump on his neck and strangle him? Or have you had an experience like this?
No, I get why the guy did that to Blake. I mean, Blake is very handsome. He's very he's got a lot of charisma. He's always like perfectly kind of dressed and outfitted and has all the cool gear. Like, I'm sure a lot of people look at him and think, you know, fuck this guy, right? And I get that. It's not that common that happens from my thing. I think I go so far the other way where the demeanor, first thing I typically do is I tell people I don't compete, right? Oh, I'm a hobbyist. I don't compete. And then they go, oh, okay, well, that takes it a rung down, right? Second thing is I don't usually stand up. Certainly, like if I go to a new gym or something, I'm probably going to sit on my butt and pull guard and whatever, right? So let's take the like hardcore wrestling off the table, you know? And I think if like a few just subtle body differences and a few decisions of just sort of what you say and how you sort of bring yourself down and let them know that. Like I find that I don't get in too many situations at these gyms because the people aren't viewing me as a threat, right? Whereas people come in and they've got, you know, competition patches on and, you know, they start looking, and this is in no way how I think Blake reflects himself, to be clear, but, you know, I think there are those guys and they have that look and they look intense and they're not smiling and you're like, oh shit, like I'm in for like the war with that guy. Like I'm going to, you know, avoid that guy or, you know, whatever. So I really kind of go out of my way, probably too much so. And there's actually a lot of guys that I've gotten to know more over the years. And they're like, oh, like I like tapped you the first time we rolled and now you like beat me all the time. And it's because like I go so slow at the beginning with people because I want to just make sure we're not getting into that situation, you know? And then as we get to know each other, I feel like we can pick up the pace, you know, over time. So
I have a slightly different question for both of you. And again, you both have been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time. Blake, you've been doing it for what, 9 years now? 10 years? 10 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ben, how long have you been doing it?
17.
17 years. And from what I've observed, a big part of jiu-jitsu is your capacity to learn and to think systematically and to have a principle-based orientation so you can develop a system and then adapt it based on, you know, who you're rolling with or things that you learn. How do you guys approach learning at this point, and how has your practice of jiu-jitsu informed methods of learning? And then the corollary to that is, how does it inform your learning or skill acquisition in other domains of life?
One, like, I think that is a very generous view of jiu-jitsu. I think there are guys that get to black belt doing one thing really, really well, or one or two things really, really well. And they've become so comfortable in doing that part of the game, that they they almost think that they don't have to put together the rest of it. I would say good black belts, people who people who become really good at the sport do it, come from a systematic approach. But just like transparency, like I think there's an idea of jiu-jitsu that like, oh, we're all these, like human chess wizards, and some of us aren't. And some of us are really good at jiu-jitsu and just aren't that way. As far as like a systems approach, like that's actually, I'm a independent contractor, freelance creative director, and copywriter. And like what I bring to the table often is not necessarily my ability as a writer, but my approach to like having a systems-based approach to what I do. And that's very much like grounded in the way I think about jiu-jitsu, right? Like having, when I come to an opponent and I feel the way they grab my gi, or when I see how they respond to a grip that I make, or how they respond to, anything that I do, and then I can kind of put together the chain of potential moves or ways that the match can go. That is an approach that I am able to then take to like meeting a new client and asking them questions about their business, so that we can get over maybe our getting to know you phase very rapidly. And I can learn their industry and their business like very quickly, to the point where I can feel confident writing or telling them what they should do in it. So yeah, I see it in my life, in my career, like frequently like that.
Ben, how about you?
To be honest, this is the thing that I struggle with the most. Well, I'll take a step back. I'll say there's varying levels of how good you are at jiu-jitsu and what a black belt means, for example. And in fact, a lot of the best people in jiu-jitsu are held back by their instructors to win tournaments. So you'll find like a really high level competition purple belt is going to beat, 99% of hobbyist black belts, right? Because it's just, they're competing, they're training, they're fighting all the time, they're in their prime, whatever the reason is, right? You can get a black belt in jiu-jitsu like me by kind of hanging around long enough and being, good enough, but not great enough, if that makes sense. Like you will eventually get promoted just by sticking with it, right? And that's basically how I became a black belt. It wasn't, winning tournaments, again, wasn't even competing, but, I stayed on the mat long enough, got decent enough where it wasn't an embarrassment for the teacher to give me my black belt. I really struggle with sort of the systematic approach. And I think that I have more of like an artsy sort of whimsical mind, if you will, like creative, lots of ideas, ADD type thing going on in my head. And I've really struggled to hone in and just practice the same move over and over again. And I think that's why you see these guys like Mikey Musumeci who drill 10 hours a day. They're myopically focused on getting better at this one thing. And I think that's why a lot of like engineers and people who have that brain of connecting the dots and following a system, following instructions, continuing with the plan, become really good at jiu-jitsu. And that's not me, frankly. So I'm addicted to the feeling when I leave the mat. I would say it's almost like my positive drug. I've never really gotten good enough at the drilling and the repetition and sort of the stuff that you're talking about as I wish I would.
Yeah, I would also describe Ben as like a fun roll. So like Ben will kick my ass. The last time we rolled, I think he triangled me twice in a round, and he just started at Kaios, which is, by the way, like an elite school. Total badasses there. And Ben, but I leave feeling great. Like I have a great time rolling with Ben because the way he rolls and the way he approaches jiu-jitsu is, I would say, whimsical and fun. And like, that is one of my goals, right? My goal isn't to beat people. My goal is when I leave for jiu-jitsu, people to be like, I want to roll with Blake again. Cause that was fun. Cause like, yeah, like, even as a competitor, 99% of the time I do jiu-jitsu isn't in the competition format, So my teammates are the ones who make me better and I'm the one who make them better. And so I think that's a great goal to have. And again, like Andy, like you passed me that video the other day of that guy walking out of the sauna. And I think that's like that's actually been one of the most impactful things, that message that guy had, is that what you're selling more than anything is the way you make people feel. And I think about that a lot in jiu-jitsu because, people aren't going to remember the fact that people are going to remember the fact that like I made them smile way more than they're going to remember the fact that I made them tap. Anybody can make you tap, it's not anybody, but it's the attitude in the environment.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Do people want to roll with me? Are people excited to roll with me and see me when I come in, or like you, the guy who everybody's walking and pretending not to see, looking away from?
Right. And so, Ben, as you think about shifting away from your jujitsu practicing, going back to Guardian, when you think about where you want to take Guardian over time, what is that vision? And if you had the opportunity to accelerate what you're doing right now, and I don't know what inputs you would need to do that. I don't know if that's human capital, if it's money, but if you had like 100x of what you needed right now, what is your maximum vision of what this would become?
Man, glad you asked this question. Now, because of the way that we're doing the model, we can scale almost, to an unlimited amount, right? There are thousands of amazing instructors out there. And because of the growth of jiu-jitsu, martial arts in general, the UFC, but specifically jiu-jitsu, there are so many great people who have come up over the last 10 years and now want to open their schools or already have. And I would say that the vast majority of them really share that same ethos, which is like, hey, I want to help more kids, right? I want to get more people, kids and adults, frankly, but I want to get people into jujitsu. So it's not hard to identify them, and we actually have a wait list right now of schools who have contacted us, people who have contacted us and want to start these in their local area. We kind of have everything on pause right now as far as the expansion, because we have to obviously be really careful, make sure the model's working, make sure that we're kind of working out all the kinks, and then we can slowly start to add folks in there. I think the biggest opportunity is what I see with what we're doing in Peru, these third world areas, right? Third world countries, but specifically, fourth world areas within the third world country, where the dollars can go so incredibly far. And, we're essentially supporting that program 100% in Peru, right? And that means that there's kids, about half the kids that come to the gym don't have running water at home. They don't have sandals. They certainly don't have gis and rash guards. And so we're able to take a very small amount of money compared to what we're able to do in somewhere like the Bay Area, and we're able to, fully activate that school. And then it's just a matter of money for larger spaces, more uniforms, more amenities, competition. If we want to sponsor kids in the competition, there's so many things that we can do from there. But there's basically what we're doing in Peru times 500 locations around the world is how I would envision it if I had an unlimited amount of money, right? And of course, continuing to do things in the States, but I say that only internationally because that's where they don't really have the local ability to fundraise on their own. So that's where the money really comes in handy, where in the US, it's more of a logistical problem. It's part money, but it's also just, logistics. There, it's like, if we have the money, that's all they need.
Yeah, Ben, part of what's really jumped out at me in this conversation today, and it has been a common denominator that I've noticed over, having done this podcast for 4 years now. I've done about 70 episodes, and I've spent most of my career for the past 25 years telling the stories or helping to tell the stories of the world's top performers, brands, businesses, is that for you and for Blake, it sounds like jiu-jitsu has been this catalyst for you. It's connected you to a community. It's been a vector for personal growth and development. It's been something that you guys didn't say this explicitly, but I have to imagine that it's given you confidence in other domains of your life when you're off the mat and doing the rest of what you do. And Ben, part of what you're doing with Guardian is you're providing this opportunity for other people to have that experience. And in addition to that, as you were kind of discussing hero worship that happens within jiu-jitsu schools of the owners or the black belts running the school often, and I think culturally this is happening with jiu-jitsu right now as well, is there's there's almost an archetype. I asked a question about it, but around like, oh, it's this magical way of thinking, or there's this wizard-like quality. And part of what really jumped out at me about what you both shared is it's really about becoming the maximum version of yourself, not copying what someone else is doing or worshiping them, even if that's the message that you're hearing in a school. Or I think particularly in the world of podcasts and creators now, there's kind of this mono culture, mono message about jiu-jitsu. And I think today you all talked about kind of a different side of it, which I was really refreshing to hear. And I really appreciate you sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
I think your point's very, very valid there, by the way. Like, if you take it to more like a business analogy, stock trading, any of these things, it's anybody who's just sort of following the herd is typically not going to do great things. And, I think that you see these stories, I know you see these stories of a lot of these guys who have built these multi-billion-dollar companies, for example, and they all have the same story of that, like they pitched 50 venture capitalists and 49 of them rejected them, and everyone told them their idea was dumb, and like all of a sudden it was 10 years later became this massive thing because they saw something that nobody else saw. And I think that's like really, in a lot of ways, the only way to do great things in life is like find something that not everybody else believes in. I think that's like the Peter Thiel question that he asks is like, what's one, truth that, you believe that like everybody else doesn't or something like that. And he uses that as his question to try to figure out like if you're a outside the box thinker or you're just like another person that's not worth him having a meeting with.
Well, thanks for having this meeting today. It was great to have you here. And Ben, if people want to learn more about Guardian, where should they go?
Our website is guardiangym.org. So you can go there. You can see all of our different academies. Anybody who wants to support us can choose a specific academy that they want to donate and see their money go to make sure it's going to the right place. On Instagram, same thing, at Guardian Gym. To follow us along there. You can subscribe to our newsletter on our website to stay in touch, 6-7 times a year with just some stories and kind of what's going on. But yeah, you can, Google Guardian Jiu-Jitsu. You'll find us pretty quickly and come check out what we're doing. We'd love to have you follow along.
Awesome. Ben, thanks for being here. Blake, thanks for joining me as always. And thank you for getting flying triangled multiple times so you could share that story, which I enjoy every time I hear it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
This is Andrew Vance. Thank you for listening to Choose the Hard Way. Sharing is caring. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, hit 5 stars wherever you listen, leave a positive review, and share it with a friend. Sign up for the newsletter at choosethehardway.com to get the story behind the stories you hear on Choose the Hard Way, episode updates, and much more. Thanks for listening and have a great day.